Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and we've got a wonderful show ahead for you today. For those of you who keep thinking about how to get these wonderful cruise packages or the best deals on airlines so that you can take that long vacation that you've been looking for, how about throwing a little bit of adventure into it, maybe even reducing the cost and, in fact, in some cases, perhaps even earning a little bit of money while you're contributing to the world and helping out. With us on the program today is author of a wonderful book, Mapping Your Volunteer Vacation. That's right, we're talking about volunteer vacations where you actually do something other than sit by the pool with a little umbrella and a drink waiting for room service. Joining us on the program is our guest, Jane Stanfield, and we're going to talk about what a volunteer vacation is and how to find the right volunteer vacation that fits for you, as well as some of the logistics that you want to consider when you decide to embark on this endeavor. I'd like to welcome to our program today our guest, Jane Stanfield. And Jane, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Dan. It is an honor to be with you today.
Well, thank you. I like to feel honored to be with. Now let's talk about volunteer vacations and what they are and what some of the possibilities somebody can do when they're on one of these.
My goodness, Dan, you've just opened up a huge can of worms. There are so many possibilities. But back to your first point, a volunteer vacation is something that you can do where you go someplace you've never been, doing something you've never done before, with people you've never met, doing good for the world as well as for yourself, and having the time of your life. What's not to love about that?
Exactly.
Basically, a volunteer vacation is you go on vacation specifically in order to volunteer. And the proportion of time that you want to volunteer versus vacation is up to you. There are many different agencies and organizations and programs that offer more of a volunteer experience, others that offer more of a vacation experience, and everything in the middle. So
now, this is something that you can certainly do by yourself, or you can even do with a friend or even several friends. Is that true?
You bet. You can go as an individual. You can go as an individual and join a group. You can take a spouse with you. There are many where they're open for teens to go as an individual. And there are many that you can even take a family on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about how a person can get started here. Generally, first of all, how long are these volunteer programs that you're talking about here?
Again, it depends. You can do them both in your state, in our country, as well as around the world, so that there's a wide range. Normally, if you're an American, you're probably trying to fit a vacation into a 2-week time frame, and most of the volunteer vacations that I found that are through agencies know that, and they fit that experience to fit that time frame. And yet it can be as little as a few days. It can be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then obviously if you want to put multiple ones back to back, you can make it much longer. It's just really up to you what your goal is, how much time you've got, what's going to fit for you right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, I also understand in your book when you talk about mapping your volunteer vacation that there are actually placement companies. Talk about that and how to know which ones are good and which ones you're about ready to lose yourself out on.
You bet. There are so many, and I just found out about volunteer vacations myself in 2004, and yet what I found is when I started researching is that a lot of the American organizations that I ended up using had been in existence for 20-plus years. So this is not a new way to travel. It's had a huge upswing in popularity after both Hurricane Katrina and the tsunami, and then obviously more recently after the Haiti and the Chile episode. So there are agencies that have been around for many, many years, and certain agencies draw a certain type of project or a certain type of volunteer. For instance, Earthwatch, based in Massachusetts, is a program that puts volunteers on a scientific team with researchers. So you are helping a PhD or a renowned researcher in a certain area help them collect data for their research.
Wow.
Another organization, Global Volunteers, been established for at least 25 years, based in Minnesota, focuses on building peace one relationship at a time, and they focus on children's education and children's health issues, both domestically and around the world. So it really depends on, some agencies are very thematic, others offer a very broad range of experiences. So it really depends on what you might be heading for.
Mhm. Well, it sounds like there's just such a nice variety of things to do where you really feel like you're giving something other than just your time when it comes to doing these volunteer vacations. Now, it seems like it could take, some doing to get all this set up. How can a person get started and who can help?
Well, there are many books out there. I think my book is a great one because it takes you step by step. It steps you through why are you volunteering, what do you want to do, where do you want to go, when, etc. There are other books that have been out for many, many years that are sort of a compendium of different ones, and they list the agency, how much it costs, what to expect, where you can go, etc. So basically, I normally ask people to start with the question for themselves. Why are you volunteering? Are you wanting to take a skill you already have that you use at home and share that? Or are you interested in trying something absolutely different than what you do on a day-to-day basis? Mm-hmm. And that can help you to begin knowing where to search. And then normally there's one of these next three questions is normally a critical one. Are you trying to find a project based on something you really want to do? Like, what do you want to do? Or are you approaching it from, gee, I've always wanted to go to Peru. What can I do in Peru? So it's more of a location-determined one. Or then the next one, obviously, is how much is it going to cost? So those four questions are a really good starting point to help people start researching.
Now, when you're on these volunteer vacations, some people may think to themselves, gee whiz, this sounds like it's all work and no play, but that's not really the case at all, is it?
Well, it depends on what you're interested in. If your main goal is to volunteer, then you can find a volunteer project that is going to use you 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. And it sounds like work, but for instance, if you are going to be working with orphan baboons, you don't do that at home. Yes, it's working, but it doesn't feel like work because it's such an exciting experience.
Right. But at the same time, you can enjoy the area as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
Normally, even if you're going through an agency and you're going for a 2-week placement, normally you get a minimum of 1 day off, probably the weekend in between those 2 weeks. You're going to have at least 1 full day off. And a lot of times, depending on what the workflow is and the weather, etc., you may have some half days off here and there. So it really depends. What they normally recommend is if you're going for one of those intensive programs where you're working more like 8 hours a day, to plan any major vacationing either just before you start the volunteer work or just after you start the volunteer work.
Very good. Now, it's really interesting because a lot of times one of the things that prevent people from going on vacations at times is money and being able to set up a budget to do so. What does this usually cost? What's the range for certain fees, for instance?
Well, it really depends. I've got some examples of where you can work for under $100 a week. In the United States, you can work in the national parks in their program called A Passport in Time. There are no fees, but you pay for your own transportation. There's also one in Spain, which you go for a week. It's called Pueblo Inglés, where you speak English to Spanish business people and help them perfect their conversational English. And for the price of an airline ticket to Spain and possibly 2 nights of hotel on either side of your week, for the week you're on that experience in Pueblo Inglés, they house and feed you completely. So those are some low-priced ones. Some mid-range ones where maybe $300 to $500 a week. The baboon sanctuary that I worked with in South Africa called CARE is about $400 a week. Also, Volunteers for Peace, which operates in many countries all over the world, has a membership that you sort of join, and then it's about $150 to maybe $300 per project. So it can range widely. And then there are others that are very all-inclusive, like the Earthwatch one and the Global Volunteers one. Those are probably $2,000 plus for a 2-week experience. But the thing I want to point out about them is when you're working with a U.S. nonprofit like Global Volunteers or Earthwatch, because a large portion of what you pay is housing and feeding you, and there is also an out-and-out donation to support the project, that because they are a 501c3 through the IRS, the vast majority of your expenses, not only the payment that you pay for them, but your airfare, possibly your shots, and anything else like that, can be almost 100% tax deductible.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, as far as just the kind of activities that you can get yourself involved in here. Now, are there tax advantages to people who take these vacations?
If you're using an American nonprofit, yes. What I found is that if you are using a foreign agency to place you, for instance, the baboons that I did in South Africa, those tended to be less on a per-week basis, but because the money was not going to an American nonprofit, I could not write off those expenses. But even when I went internationally with Earthwatch, where I was in Thailand and I was in Australia with them, because it was an American nonprofit placing me, and I was going predominantly to do volunteer work, almost 100% of those expenses were tax deductible. And
oh, that's great.
That, of course, it does depend on what your tax profile looks like, and you would have to talk to your accountant on it. But generally, the nonprofits who are placing, they will be able to tell you up front, yes, a portion of what you're paying will be tax deductible, or not.
That's wonderful. I mean, just to think that you can actually take a vacation and in summer maybe even all of it could be tax deductible. That's kind of really interesting there. Now, we've already covered, that if you have to pay for it, who gets the money and what that is actually all for. I guess sometimes people might want to consider, is there a way they can get scholarships, anything like that?
There are some of the agencies offer scholarships. For instance, Earthwatch has a scholarship for teachers. If they want to apply and they are successful, they are given a complete experience. There are scholarships for some school science majors who are thinking of going. The dilemma with a scholarship is that just like a nonprofit in the United States mainly depends on volunteers, if the foreign nonprofit where you're going to go work had the money, they'd hire locally. But
right.
If they don't have the money, they like the volunteers to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line is, especially on a short-term project, a 1, a 2, or a 3 weeks, there's a lot of infrastructure that goes in that, and the volunteer has to be housed and fed. So whether the volunteer sponsors it or the other nonprofit sponsors it, someone's got to pay for that. Mm-hmm. So the ones that tend to be the most economical are obviously the ones where you're going for a considerable amount of time, maybe 4, 6, 8, 12 months. Those where you almost become a staff member. Those you might be able to find some type of scholarship for. I do have one recommendation if you are a business professional and you'd like to go do some volunteer work. There is the International Executive Service Corps that you can look at, and you can apply to them and tell them what your skills are and how long you've got and what you might be willing to do, and they may be able to place you internationally. But that sort of shifts from, it's not quite volunteer work, it goes almost more into employment.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now, is this something that is okay for a person to do on their own, or would it be better if they actually, say, brought a friend or maybe even take their family, and is that possible?
You can do all that. I, as a single person, did it all by myself. I planned them. I went through the agencies, but I put all of my trip together by myself. And, if you go with a large agency, a lot of the logistics are already planned for you. They basically tell you which airport to go into. They tell you which hotel to get for your first night, or they pick you up at the airport and they house and feed you. So it really depends on, are you an intrepid traveler? Do you mind going by yourself and then possibly joining a group? Or would you rather take a buddy with you from the get-go? And one way of making these more economical is if you can find a project you really like, say with Earthwatch or Global Volunteers or even Cross Cultural Solutions, which is another American nonprofit that does this type of work. If you can approach them and say, look, I've got a group of 6 girlfriends and we all want to go to Peru and work in this project. They may give you a reduction in your rate because you have done a lot of their marketing for them. You've already filled, a good portion of a team. Mm-hmm. So that's one way of possibly making this more economical.
Oh, okay. Seems pretty reasonable to kind of go that direction there. Now, do you have to have special training if there are particular fields that you're interested in volunteering in, or do they just pretty much take people who are enthusiastic and interested in doing volunteer work?
It sort of depends on the agency. The vast majority of them, the beauty of a volunteer vacation is that you do not have to show up with any special skills, and you normally do not have to show up knowing the local language. If that is required, they're going to be very specific in the literature. For instance, there are countries in Africa where French is the main non-African language, and they will say, French required. Or in some of the Latin American or Central American countries, they'll say Spanish, required. But for the vast majority of them, you don't have to show up with any of those skills. I did archaeology without a degree. I taught English without having a teaching certificate. I worked with wildlife, although I had never worked with primates or penguins before. So that's the beauty of these, is you really get to try something totally out of your comfort zone, and they're willing and happy to train you, knowing that it's going to take a while for you to get in the rhythm and knowing how to do everything. But that still helps them because they've got someone who is now trained and can give them enough service for the time you're there. And then they send you back home, and they hope that you're so excited about what you did. You tell all your friends and say, this was so wonderful, you all have to go do this.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, and why wouldn't you?
Yeah. But if there is a specific need, for instance, Doctors Without Borders, yes, predominantly they take medically trained professionals, doctors, interns, nurses, etc., Lawyers Without Borders, Engineers Without Borders. But, those are sort of the rarities. The vast majority of them you're going to find, they know they're going to train you, and they're happy to do that.
Well, you're certainly right that Lawyers Without Borders is a rarity. Now, here's something that can be a concern. I remember this from an interview that I did many years ago about a man who took his family, and they pretty much sold the family farm and decided to go on a world vacation, sort of around the world with the family. And one of the concerns finally became real, and that is, what happens if you get sick? And what is the situation with this? Do you usually get taken care of, or are you kind of on your own, or what happens?
Again, one of the traditional expenses that happens when you are going through an agency is, in addition to housing and feeding you and sending you all the preliminary paperwork, normally they offer you insurance while you're on that work site. And if you're going to be traveling a few days on either side, you can probably extend that coverage to cover you. If you're going to do something that's very extreme, and I haven't really found any of those, but if you have possibly a health concern that you're considering, you can ask them, what is your traditional insurance? And this is my dilemma, and they may say, well, maybe you want some extra. But normally when you're doing either that type of trip insurance or medical, health insurance for those types of trips, because you're only going for a limited number of days, the additional premium you're going to pay is not that big.
Okay.
And when you sign up for one of these agencies, you fill out an application and you explain why you want to do this, and then they ask what your health history is. And if they see anything in your health history that they're going to be concerned about, for instance, if you've had recent back surgery and you have signed up to be on the Koala Project with Earthwatch, and they know you're going to be moving equipment up and down the hill on your back, they might call you and say, with your recent back surgery, this may not be the best fit for you right now. Might you consider this one instead? So, they want it, everyone wants it to be a win-win-win situation. You want to have a fabulous time. The sending organization wants you to be happy. And the receiving organization wants you to know what you're going to be coming into and have a wonderful time and then return from it.
Sounds reasonable to me, that's for sure. Now, you talked about being in the right shape for the job, so I guess it really depends. But generally speaking, you don't have to be, in top physical condition to volunteer, as I understand.
Right. And again, any of the more physical ones, they're going to be indicating, you will be carrying equipment. You may be hiking up to 3 miles a day. You may have to lift 20 pounds. They're going to give you a small schedule of what to expect, and realize that can always change because the one thing you can expect during travel is change. So they're going to tell you. And if you have any concern, you can talk to them about that. There are times in the scientific ones that you may need to backpack. You may need to carry equipment. There are other times if you are on any of the oceanic ones, either through the Oceanic Society or Earthwatch, you may need to scuba or you may need to be able to dive. And if that's the case, they're going to tell you that you need this certification up front. The same way if you're going into a a longer-term teaching English type program, they're going to alert you up front. You need the TEFL certificate, which is a Teaching English as a Foreign Language program, which is available in the States. In fact, it's even available in Denver. So they're going to tell you if there's any hard and fast rules of what you must be able to do or what you must bring with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to me that if you really wanted to learn a foreign language, that this would be an ideal way for you not only to learn, say, here in the United States, but actually to put it to use in the country that you want to find out more about.
Exactly, exactly. And some of them care so much about it that they even give you remedial language lessons, because what they really want is you to have a more in-depth travel experience than you would as a normal traveler. And so many of them, they encourage the cross-cultural connection. In fact, some of them even you are housed in with a local family called a homestay, where you can really practice the language. And there's always reciprocity. You're helping them with their English, they're helping you with your French or your Spanish.
Especially with your French cooking.
Or your French cooking. Or they're going to show you how to make an authentic tortilla. And they're going to laugh at your poor attempt at it, but they're going to do it, all in fun. And you will walk away knowing how to make a proper tortilla out of the experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about age limits? Are there? I mean, do you have to be 18, or can you be younger or older?
For the vast majority of the agencies I'm finding, if you're going as an independent, you must be at least 18. The upper age range is depending on your health and your vitality. I am aware that the oldest volunteer on the archaeological dig I did in Thailand was over 80.
Wow.
And while he was not in the pit digging up the burial sites, he was up on the ground level under a tarp in the shade with a fan blowing on him, and he was cleaning up bits of pottery and gluing them back into entire pots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, there are agencies that are knowing there's a growing wave of young people from 12 and up who are really anxious to have some of these experiences. And so more and more teen-focused programs are showing up. And then there are certain agencies that do allow volunteers even as young as 6, providing they're there with their family.
Well, of course, yeah.
I don't think I'd send a 7-year-old to Ethiopia by himself.
Yeah, exactly. Now, give us an example of some low-cost volunteer vacations people might consider, and then maybe some short-term ones as well.
Sure. Some low-cost ones that I can highly recommend. I've given you one, Pueblo Inglés. That's the one in Spain. But some that are maybe closer to home. Have you heard of WWOOF? WWOOF? That is Worldwide Workers on Organic Farms.
Wow. And
that is a membership organization, and it's based in many countries around the world. And what you do is you join the membership organization for well under $100, and you get a listing of the organic farms in that country that are willing to house and feed you in return for about 4 to 6 hours a day of work. And so you can do it in the United States. I know people who have worked on organic vineyards in France. Doesn't that sound just awful?
Oh, yeah.
My niece woofed across Australia. So you would, if you were going to multiple countries, you would buy multiple memberships, one for each of the countries you were going to visit. And then you get a listing, and then you call the farm yourself, and you say, I'm going to be in your neighborhood the week of the 1st through the 7th. Can you use me? And they'll say, yes. Why don't you come on Wednesday? We can use you through Sunday. And you'll be helping either prepare the ground, or you're going to be helping with the harvest, or you're going to be helping prepare the produce for processing, or possibly labeling jars, or standing at a food market, helping to sell the produce. So it just depends on what is going on that season of the year. So that's a good one. Like I said, there's Passport in Time, which is working in the national parks. Passport in Time is sort of their archaeology one. So there are certain national parks that have archaeological experiences that you can go. So those are some low-cost ones. Short-term ones, for students, you can work with the Student Conservation Association. That can be up from 1 week to 10 weeks. Those are available, again, in the national parks. It's a $25 application fee. And then Habitat for Humanity obviously is available in your home state, in your home city, and possibly all around the U.S. as well as internationally. And those can be from 1 week to several months, depending on what what you can fit into your calendar.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, it sounds like a really great place for a lot of people to start. Mapping Your Volunteer Vacation is the book, and it sounds to me like, there's a lot of great opportunity for those who are retired and want something to do, and for those who are as young as 6, as you said, and they just want adventure as well. And I think that would be good, especially for Americans, American children and young adults, is to really find a way to stretch themselves out of the United States and find out how other people around the world live and actually take part of that.
That a lot of people, one of the reasons why they like to volunteer is they like to put a personal face on America. Especially when you're going to more remote areas, you may be the first either Caucasian person or American that they've ever seen, and to have you show up and take an interest in what they're doing and work side by side with them to help them construct something or build something or help educate, they get a personalized face, and that's how relationships begin, and understanding can happen.
Mm-hmm. Can you, if you don't mind, briefly share what one of your favorite volunteer vacations was and why that is?
We have 3 hours. I have so many stories I can share. Let me just I'll tell you about several that were very important. The first one I went to was in France. And I picked that location because I don't speak French, and I was going to be working on a medieval reconstruction site where we were rebuilding a crumbling castle. And
wow.
I figured if I could go in a place where I'd never been and I didn't speak the language and I was doing something I'd never done before, then this would be for me.
Mm-hmm.
And we helped to build a retaining wall into this castle that would allow vehicles to go up into this castle. We worked about 4 to 6 hours a day. It was about $700 for the 2 weeks I was there. We had fresh bread and fresh ingredients for all of our meals, and it was a wonderful way to ease into the situation because we had our afternoons off.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a sort of a volo tourism experience. I had almost half days of each, and that really got me going.
Mm-hmm.
From that, I developed a year where I did 12 volunteer vacations back to back, and the 3 that really inspired me to get off my couch and go was the archaeological dig in Thailand through Earthwatch. And the reason I had always wanted to do that is because I'd never studied archaeology, and I had regretted not at least taking a class in it.
Mm-hmm.
And within 4 hours of being on the site, having had our tour and we'd had lunch, I was handling 3,000-year-old bits of pottery.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe. And then within the 2 weeks I was there, I was lifting intact pots 10 feet out of the ground that were 3,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that one so much, I went back the following year at around the same time of the year because it was the last time this major professor was going to be at this location.
Mm-hmm.
And he needed to finish his data collection in order that he could start analyzing everything and start publishing on it. And I wanted to be there and see that last experience because I knew it would be very special.
Mm-hmm. And you also hit something on the nail, too. It's the kind of people that you meet and get involved with. I mean, you're talking about creating worldwide connections. And as big as the world is, I can tell the listeners for certainty, is that it's a lot smaller than you think it is.
It definitely is. And the one thing I want to point out about Earthwatch is although the main office is based in Massachusetts, it has offices in Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And I found that where an office is based sort of helps you determine what other nations might be volunteering. So on Earthwatch, I found it was a very international mix of volunteers. I was there with at the koala one I did with Earthwatch, there was a woman from Bangladesh, there was a woman from the Philippines, there were Australians, there was a man from England, and there was a woman from Germany, as well as myself. A very international team. So that can also, you can have an international experience not only in the people that you're serving, the people that you're helping, but also in the volunteers who are going to be working alongside you. And that can add an extra dimension. So that's sort of another way of maybe choosing. I found like Global Volunteers based in Minnesota working mainly with children, that tended to draw only North American volunteers, which were fabulous. And yet some of my other experiences were a lot more international mix based on where those agencies were based.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting that you realize that we are all, although uniquely different, uniquely the same as well, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's what I found whether I was in South Africa, whether I was in Thailand, whether I was in Peru. When I was working with different agencies, the bottom line for anyone around the entire globe is we all wanted the same thing. We want safety for ourselves and our children, the ability to educate our kids and have them be healthy, and the ability to have some valuable work that you feel passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all want the same thing.
We need to be showing more of these things on the news instead of all the other garbage that we tend to believe that the world's out to get us kind of a thing.
Definitely. They're a lot more interesting, I can tell you that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, Jane, could you go ahead and give a website where people can find out more about how they can map their volunteer vacation and maybe even get a hold of the book so they can start planning?
You bet. My website for my company's name is Where Is She Heading? And when you take the first letters of those words, it makes the word wish.
Ah.
My website is Jane Stanfield, JaneStanfield, wish, WISH.com. And my book is on there, Mapping Your Volunteer Vacation is on there, and also a second book that I wrote a chapter in called The Voluntary Traveler, where I highlight my experiences in South Africa working with the baboons.
Working with baboons, how about
that? I have to tell you, Dan, that was the one, when I saw that information come across my desk, that was the one that really spurred me into action. It had a Western volunteer holding an infant baboon about the size of a basketball, and the baboon had a diaper on it with a hole cut in it for the tail to come out, and she was bottle feeding it. And I thought, if I could get that close to an infant baboon, that would be so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why when I teach my classes and I give my presentations and I write my articles, I always tell people, you really have to focus on what is going to excite you, if it's the location or that project, because there are so many things that can happen during a vacation, and things don't always go 100% to plan. But boy, if you really want to be there doing what you're doing, you jump out of bed every morning excited to get to go do that.
I was just mentioning the other day, it was funny to watch on the boardwalk people walking their dogs, and what was cute was when you would see puppies. And they're always enthusiastic, jumping, trying to get here and there and get everywhere and just get involved in every little thing going on. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if we could find a way for our entire lives to have that kind of curiosity and enthusiasm?
Exactly.
And it seems to me like taking a volunteer vacation can do just that for our listeners out there today.
When you pick the project that is really calling to you, you bet. And if you think puppies are hyperactive, you should work with infant baboons. They
funny.
are like toddlers on a sugar high.
Oh, no.
And they are bright, and they are quick, and they are nimble, and it was absolutely amazing to watch them as they would problem solve, and they'd have little arguments with each other, and someone's little ego would be offended, and they'd go off and they'd have a pout, and then they'd come over and they'd need a cuddle, and then they'd get distracted, and it's time to play, or showed up.
Oh, the enthusiasm. Again, Mapping Your Volunteer Vacation is the book, and you can go to JaneStanfieldWish.com, right?
Yes, that's correct.
JaneStanfieldWish.com to find out how you can get started on your volunteer vacation, no matter what your interest is. And Jane, thank you for joining us here on the program. It's been a pleasure to have you.
You are welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
Look forward to the baboons.
Okay.
And also for you, the listeners out there, look forward to those baboons as well. You can take that beautiful volunteer vacation and get yourself involved in other cultures as well as sharing your culture with others as well. JaneStanfieldWish.com is the place that you can go visit. And if you can't get all that written down, then just go to Beyond50Radio.com. That's the number 50 with a 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. Also be sure to visit us at our blog where we have this information and also archive our shows as well. You can download those or you can also send them to friends as well. We thank you for joining us. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.